I think it's pretty clear from all the work that's been done internationally and all that the scientists tell us and countries that are serious about it, particularly the European countries, is that there is a pathway to stabilising climate, but it does require, it's not about technical, it's about political. It's about having the will to act.
When you say it's not about technical, what about the advances that have been made technologically? I mean, we can have a whole argument about fracking and the upsides and downsides of that. Yeah. But America is reducing its carbon emissions thanks to pivoting to natural gas from oil. You've got things like Tesla and the electric car boom, and a lot of people do feel like technology will ultimately get us out of this without the heavy hand of government. Are they naive?
Utterly. And in fact, fracking's not getting us out of anything. It's just getting us into more trouble, because you get a lot of methane with fracking. You get a lot of leakage. And the potential impact on groundwater, aquifers below ground, water systems and supplies and so forth is massive. And fracking has completely trashed and destroyed parts of the US already. It's a shocking industry, actually, and I really hope that we don't do too much of it here. The sort of arguments and discussions that we're having, Josh, about it are fascinating in a way, because what it really says underneath is there's enough wordage and thinking around the place that essentially refuses to accept that we can't continue as business as usual and expecting a technological fix per se to get us out of trouble, but that we actually have to do a bigger change. And the part of the bigger change, which is pretty straightforward, is not that big. It's just saying to coal companies and oil companies, your business model is damaging the planet, and you now can no longer do it. And guess what? We've got other ways of making cars drive along a road, and we've got other ways of providing the power for us when we turn on our lights. Let's start using it.
Right, but the biggest sort of advance in encouraging people to understand that we've got other ways of driving cars along the road was a private individual who had a vision of making electric cars cool instead of dorky, and went ahead and did it, even in the absence of government action.
Well, he's a dangerous individual who's managed to do one good bit of technology. And by the way, do not forget that the Obama administration provided Tesla with a great deal of government support in its early phase.
Sure, a great deal of support for all car manufacturers, including petrol car manufacturers.
Nothing happens without the hand of government doing something. Sure. Hopefully the right way.
Yeah, but they weren't putting their fingers on the scales of electric cars versus petrol cars. They were still subsidising the auto industry.
They were enthralled to the standard motor industry thing on it. But no, you need to have a mix of both things. You need to harness and utilise the best of innovation and what the best and the brightest can do. And you need to provide a really solid, robust and pretty stable environment in terms of laws and regulations to make it happen. And if you look at countries, look at South Australia. It's a great example. There are many days in South Australia now where they actually run the whole of the state on solar panels. Now, that happened because the South Australian government enacted a certain number of legislations and regulations to make that happen, and voila, it happens. Now, they're not building the solar panels. It's not the government that's installing them on people's roofs. It's not the government's coming up with the new solar panels, but they're just saying, hey, solar panels can work. Here's a way that they can. And, of course, once a government does that, it can happen easily.
Speaking of Elon Musk, did I detect a jab at him? There's a lyric. There's a lyric where about taking selfies from outer space in the song, and I thought about Elon and Bezos and Branson
and all those people.
And the techno-utopian infatuation with colonizing space. What do you make of that phenomenon at the moment? What's going on there?
You know what? There's two things for me that really make me sort of reach for the vomit bucket. One is this idea that sort of these sort of mini egos, which are really people that have done very well in business. They're not so many. They've done well in business. Figure that one way of manifesting this idea that I am a unique, great person, I'm intrepid, I'm adventurous, I'm whatever, is to spend oodles and oodles and produce lots of pollution to go do something as utterly futile and meaningless as to try and colonise a planet elsewhere, whilst at the same time, obvious comment, of course, but there's plenty of good things that they could be doing with their money here. The second thing, though, which for me is even more important, is that most of these techno-utopians and the libertarian strain amongst many of the people from Silicon Valley and Musk and others is actually fundamentally anti-democratic. They don't believe that governments can do anything particularly well. They'd like government to get the hell out of their lives. They're not committed to the idea of a common good, and there's no social contract. with them and the rest of the world, whether it's their workers, their customers maybe, but certainly not the rest of the world in terms of how they see things. They're quite attracted to what I think are extreme and dangerous philosophies, and inimical in a way to the development that we've had over the last couple of hundred years, which, for better or for worse, has gotten to us to a point where we actually think we need to treat one another equally, irrespective of our genders, our race, our biases. And we need to provide for people who aren't able to do as well as they could otherwise. So these guys are a danger, and you might watch them support Trump, for example. I mean, Peter Thiel, who's one of those people, as you would know, I think has thrown a bit of money.
He's one of the founders of PayPal.
Yeah,
he's a big, huge libertarian force in Silicon Valley.
Yeah. For me, it's a really interesting question here, and the question is, are we going to take what I would loosely describe as the European model or the American model as they've evolved? The European model recognises that in order to survive and to flourish, we have to cooperate. The American model believes that in order to survive and flourish, we need to give full rein to individual liberties, to let the great people, the smart people, the powerful business people have their way. I happen to believe that the European model is a better one. Now, I'm not talking about China and the rise of India and all that at the moment, but I think those two philosophies sort of essentially underpin what's happening in the world, particularly around climate, a very good example. And as ever, there are some elements in what people do that you can grab and say, hey, that's good, Put 6 really bright young men and women in a place and pay them, $50,000 a month and say, come up with a great idea to do X. Totally, there's no question.
Funny that you use the word X, because X is sort of Elon's,
Jump straight into it, didn't I?
Elon's letter. But that's interesting, because the way that they would say, when you say that they're, meaning the sort of techno-utopian libertarians in Silicon Valley, that their attitude is anti-democratic, they would say that's a very socialist point of view about what democracy is, because you've got this sort of faith in the state as being the locus of the demos, right? And they would say, unleash the power of the individual, and human beings will all, in an Adam Smithian sort of way, get along and help each other, respect the autonomy of the individual. And that's for the fundamental kind of unit of democracy, right? Is the individual rather than the collective action. And they might even concede that there are collective action problems like climate that require that the market isn't going to fix on its own and will need guidance, like a carbon tax or an emissions trading scheme or something like that. But they would say that the closer you can leave the centre of action to the individual and the market, the better result you're going to get. What do you say to that?
Well, that's not all they say. A part of it I agree with. I think we should have...
I mean, that's probably not what Peter Thiel would say, but it's probably what Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg would say.
So I think they're fundamentally wrong. And I think they're fundamentally dangerous ultimately. On the question of giving people the freedom to, innovate and to explore and to develop new ideas and so on and so forth, no argument from me, and neither should there be from anyone. But on the argument that government's got no business in my life, complete argument from me. I mean, what happens to these people when the sea level rise in Florida starts running over their walls? They can't produce a gated community that's going to stop a climate crisis.
Well, Elon money probably can, but
I seriously don't think he can. And I mean, some of them go and build these massive underground bunkers, on the South Island of New Zealand. It is fatuous. It'll be seen as a sign of utterly dislodged insanity at a later point in time. When people look back on it, they'll go, "What the hell?" But the other part of it is pretty straightforward. They don't want to pay taxes. They believe that they can create their own utopian vision. By what rules, under what levels of accountability, how are they employing people, how would it work? And the truth of it is that they haven't thought that through. They haven't been able to get one of their single funny little, cosmic islands or everybody in a bubble in Arizona or whatever, and they never will. That's the truth of it. They never will. What they may get is a very autocratic government, a figure like a Trumpian figure or whatever, who says, hey, I recognise what you guys are doing and I'm very supportive, but by the way, I'm going to lock up people that disagree with me and put them in jail.